Hi there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. I'm one of your hosts, David Tran, and I'm also a co-founder of Xfusion.io. Today, I'm joined by Pieter Luitjens. He's a CTO and co-founder of Private AI, a business building privacy-preserving machine learning and natural language processing tools to help make privacy and GDPR compliance more reliable. Thanks for joining us the show.
Thanks very much for having me, David. Great to be here.
So, what led you to build this type of business? How'd you get familiar and intimate with this slice of the tech world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not the primary person who started this, so the idea was primarily that of my co-founder, Patricia. So she had this idea, and she always wanted to do a startup in the privacy space, tried something else, and the market wasn't quite ready for that. And she came up with this new idea after doing a bit of market research. And that's when I jumped on board to basically do all the machine learning side of things. I mean, obviously, I thought it was a really cool idea, but I can't say it was my own.
That's fine. I think that's generally how co-founders work. We all bring something different to the table.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of things anyways, I'm a believer that ideas are pretty darn close to worth $0.00, and it all comes down to the execution.
Yeah, I'm a very big believer in that as well. And also,
how did you meet?
We studied together actually in 2014 and 2015. So I did a project in her lab, and I guess I was kind of baptism by fire because it worked out, but it was not a smooth project. I had a lot to do in a very short period of time, and that's when we weren't working for a very long period together, but we became friends. And if you can do a really tough project where everything's not going perfectly and stuff, then I think that's a really good indicator.
What were you working on back then?
That's on speech processing. So I did my master's degree at the University of Toronto. Very well known for machine learning, or deep learning, I should say. And it was in their lab, and it was a speech recognition project for difficult to pronounce words, or really long, uncommon words,
like scientific terms, chemical terms, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, to be completely transparent, it's a long time ago, so my knowledge of that. Don't worry about it. It's not going to quiz you.
I already know the space. I only came across that topic, so you just shared it with me. It's like, oh dang, that makes sense. If a scientist or doctor wants to call for if they wanted to use AI to transcribe their notes to be hey, I ordered an order of so and so medicine, I'm pretty sure there's such a small chance that AI currently will get it right.
Yeah, and that's a lot we were working on, these really hard to pronounce uncommon words that aren't used a lot. How do you improve system performance on these words?
Do you use a lot of the things that you applied in terms of the principles and techniques back then to the same in the field of, text processing now, or do you feel like they're pretty different beyond the overlap in obvious machine learning principles?
That's a great question. I feel the basics, making sure you have good data and that it's of high quality and stuff like that, is still the same, but so much has changed. What we were doing back then was really tough and took, weeks and months. With modern day tools, that would be a week or something. Just how much better the software has become, especially for deep learning and stuff like speech recognition. It's incredible, how much progress there's been on all the tools in the last. This was 6 years, I guess. 6-7 years ago. So just over that short period of time to see the progress that there's been is amazing.
Is deep learning the primary tactic you can use at Private AI?
Yeah, so we're primarily based on transformer models. So that's the latest, greatest deep learning model right now, which I don't think should come as any surprise to anyone. They just work the best, but, in terms of that's just the base, right? Getting these things to actually work properly and generalize well, and building real production systems out of it. That's a completely different story, I think, in terms of difficulty.
Do you remember what the MVP of your product was like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started off with a thesis that privacy is tools are still very nascent. It's a lot like 2014 or 2015 in the deep learning space. There's really not a lot of good tools out there. So we set up to build something specifically for mobile and edge devices so that you could like redact or like de-identify personal information like directly where it's created, specifically primarily on like iOS and Android devices and stuff like that. But yeah, what we found...
Device?
Sorry?
Were you doing it on device or did it have like a connection to the cloud?
No, on device.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you shift from that to doing it for compliance and privacy reasons in on-prem?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, we just like looked in the market and saw what people were asking for, and yeah, everyone does stuff server side, and that's not changing soon. And yeah, that's what we switched over to do. And the core technology is still the same, so it wasn't a massive switch. And yeah, it's I guess how we ended up where we are. We also focused a lot on image and video, but we also found that, and it makes complete sense as well, that most of the demand is in text, because as humans we don't communicate via pictures anymore like we do it with written words, right? Like we send emails, we write documents, all of which is text-based communication. So in hindsight, like that's like very obvious, but wasn't to us at the time.
That's how it always worked. What's the saying? Hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where Bitcoin seems super obvious in retrospect, but when you think about it in the moment, it probably seemed really dumb.
Yeah, I guess you could say that about so many other things. Also, like buying houses or something. It's definitely something I wish I did 5 years ago, but lo and behold, I'm here doing a startup instead.
There was a time in my life where I really wanted to buy a house, and I was like, that was the only thing I was like financially anxious for. And then you fast forward a few years, and I realized like I don't even want a house anymore. I feel like it's I don't know where I want to settle down, and if I had bought a house, I probably would regret it or lost significant money in terms of. Well, I guess I would have made money due to all the inflation and whatnot, but if there weren't significant inflation or significant uplifting in values, then yeah, I'd probably be in the red.
Mm.
So
yeah,
how
I guess
did you define?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
I guess the grass is always greener on the other side, but yeah, I think it's good to realize those things.
How did you split, or how do you choose which parts of the business that you focus on versus the parts of the domain that are more under your co-founder's leadership? Yeah,
great question. Patricia, being the CEO, there's something I don't want to do. I could generally get her to do it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tough decisions in the company, like who to hire. Sometimes something doesn't work well and needs to be dealt with. But generally where we draw the line, I guess, is in terms of the technical work and the building the product. That's me. And Patricia is really the public face and the public persona of our company.
Were you building the product?
A lot of the sales and, the marketing and all that kind of stuff.
Sorry, did you say that you did the marketing and sales, or she does the marketing and sales?
She does, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely in on everything, and we always make decisions as a group, but she's the public face of all of that.
So when you were building the product, were you building it from scratch, or did you have like a base that you were working off of?
We started using some like open source code, but we pretty quickly found out that it was pretty buggy, and there were a lot of things wrong with it that really impacted performance. So what we use now is basically mostly our own code base. But I mean,
and why do you feel like?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, like, of course we use like, open source software like PyTorch and, closed source software like the NVIDIA CUDA libraries and stuff like that.
What makes you feel like open source tools weren't ready at the time you needed them? Like what do you thought was like lacking?
Just the quality. A lot of these things are tested for, like a single model for like a headline use case. So let's say the most popular transformer model, which is probably BERT for like building a chatbot or something, right? So, I mean, that'll work. But then all the other stuff, if you like go a little bit off the trodden path, Yeah, it doesn't work very well. I mean, it's also because these tools are still very new. So I'm sure that in 10 or 15 years or 5 years, things will be a lot more mature. Just like already from 2014 and 2015 to now, to do deep learning, to train, for example, a CNN for image recognition, that's literally 100 times easier than what it was back in the days. Like, it took me days just to get my computer set up to do everything. The GPUs, the hardware was a fraction as powerful as it was. Everything was pretty clunky. There were lots of bugs. If you did something just even slightly different to the demo use case, it would break. So it'll come with time. But the other thing is, as well, is that's just the tooling. The other and probably more important part of any machine learning system is the data. And there aren't and will never be any open source data sets for basically most tasks out there.
That makes sense.
Actual industry use cases.
Mm-hmm. So how did you have to just convince some of your early stage customers to run or to give you samples of like private data, or like how do you know how to train appropriately?
Yeah, that's a great question. We definitely were able to get some samples of data from some of our customers. Also, we did a lot of demos and stuff like that, and we would always ask people for a couple of examples of their data. So that also helped us out a lot. And yeah, it's just really a lot of collecting stuff from different places, a lot of making sure that, the type of data they're running, like a lot of the time you won't get some, but they'll at least tell you what it looks like or what it is. Just, making sure it's all covered. Data diversity and quality, really.
Did you have a threshold internally of like, I want it to be at least X% accurate before we're ready to release it to the world? Or how do you know how to like measure quality? Like, what is good enough versus stretching for perfection that may not exist?
Yeah, I mean, for us, because we're dealing with sensitive data removal, like the threshold is very, very high. So we can't get away with like 95% or something. Our system performs at about 99.5%. Even higher, like when we train for a specific use case. So we had a pretty high bar. We weren't at that higher level when we first put the product out. It already performed quite well, but yeah, we quickly spent a lot of time like iterating and improving it. With our early customers, which was a bit of a stressful period. But yeah, we came out with a very good result. Everyone's happy now. And yeah, our system routinely outperforms any competing solution, including things from like AWS or Google, for example.
You mentioned training custom models. Is that on a per client basis or is it per use case basis? Like, how do you know when it's appropriate to use the more generalizable model that you built in-house or use a specific use case one for a specific client?
Yeah, like we try to use one model for everything. It just makes things easier and allows everyone to gain the benefits of the complete process.
And was that always so when do you train the specialized models that you're referring to?
Yeah, we really mostly just run with one. So if a customer has a very specific use case, then we'll do something special for them. But it's more about making sure our system generalizes well.
Okay. And how big is your technical team today?
Still pretty small. We're about 4 people now on the technical side, but we're growing very rapidly.
4 including you?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Most of the company is doing other things such as sales or marketing or like other functions.
So like what is on the technical roadmap for call it like next year?
Yeah, great question. Sorry?
Or even just Q4 of this year.
Yeah. I think we're in a pretty lucky situation where, we just closed our seed round, which we're very happy to have M12 and Forum Ventures. So that's Microsoft's VC fund lead. So Well, I think for a seed stage company, we're pretty lucky to be in the position we have, where we have a system which already routinely in every customer test that gets run really, really outperforms any competing service. So we already, in that sense, have I would say, a pretty well-performing product. It's just about making it better and getting it higher and higher. Like, we need to get as close to 100% as we can. So I think there's a lot of parallels between us and, like, the self-driving car companies. That, yeah, like 99.9% of the time it works, but it needs a couple of extra nines on the end to really get there. So just making sure we improve performance, add more entities, and also expand to more languages. And we're also working on a couple of other features, such as synthetic data generation.
What's the goal of that?
Yeah, so we've noticed that, synthetic data is a very big and hot topic right now, especially for like machine learning training. The problem we've noticed with synthetic data, though, is, first of all, it's synthetic. You have no idea that it's actually captures the nuances of the original data set. It can also be a lot of work to tune and to, like, how do you really know what it's doing? Like, it's a ginormous AI model, right? It's not just a black box which you can just push some text in. And on top of that as well, how can you really prove that it's not just memorizing training data and spitting whatever gets put in the input to the output, right? Like, how can you actually really prove that? Especially how can you do that intuitively to someone who's like a lawyer, for example, who has no technical background, like, especially when the training objective you're often using is a memorization one of like, okay, I'm going to hide this and you have to tell me what it is, right? That's not learning, that's memorization.
Right.
So what we've been working on is synthetic PI generation. So we only replace the bits of the data that actually need to be replaced. So it's the original data. It's just things like names, credit card numbers, and stuff like that.
I see.
And the beauty of it is that for most things that people want to do, such as sentiment analysis, that's not actually what they're after. A name, credit card number, that's not relevant to figuring out, if this customer service call, went well or not, for example.
Right.
Yeah, and also the approach we're working on is it's also just a lot simpler to use because you put it in and you get something out, and say that lawyer can look at it and see for themselves how well it works or not, right?
I see.
And you have a very strong guarantee on that's what it does, because there's the black box, you put the stuff in, something comes out, and you get that output and you put it into your system, right? Otherwise, you have this ginormous model which is feeding stuff in, and this just kind of, it's like one big coupled system, if you get what I mean. So also, whenever the software here is updated and whenever the model here is updated, that model also needs to be updated. So there's a lot of things like that. And also, just you have a really strong, battery limit there of hey, there's this text. You can look at it, you can visually inspect it with your own eyes. You don't need any technical qualifications whatsoever. And you can see that it's working or not working.
I see.
And we found it's a lot easier to use, and it's still the original data.
What do you feel gives you that competitive advantage over your competitors?
I guess really this semi-synthetic approach that most people are going for a fully synthetic approach, which from our perspective is pretty dangerous. And also, it definitely has its place, but we feel like targeted structured data generation is much more, in the real world, in industry, is a lot more robust and a lot more practical. Because, these synthetic data techniques work very well on benchmarks and stuff and, regulated demos. But for us, it's literally just a black box. You can put whatever you want to in and it'll work.
Yeah.
When we first released the product, we usually had to do some tuning on customer data to get to, a really high level of performance. It already worked relatively well, but, we could squeeze a bit more out. But we're at the point now where you can put basically any piece of text in, and I mean, we still need to do tune-ups occasionally, and actually training the models does deliver some performance improvement, but already works very, very well as it is. And that's just that's just making sure that everything on the data side has been done properly.
So in the very beginning, when you're first building the model from scratch, were you the one to inspect the input, run it through the model, and then inspect the output? How many hours do you think you spend on that process?
More than I would like to think about. It's a startup. It's a lot of work, but I enjoy what I do. So,
since you're using a neural network, when you put a input in and you see the output, and it's like, oh, that isn't right. We forgot to strip out that piece of PII. How do you go back and tell the model to be like, hey, that's actually PII and we should have stripped it out? Like, do you have to change the parameters? I'm not super familiar with
there's some parameter tuning, also making sure that we have the right kind of data. We also have a synthetic data augmentation, so it's kind of like it's synthetic data, but it's not at the same time. So we have a special technique which we can use to generate more training examples. So we do that. So that's another advantage of our systems, is that we use like few shot learning techniques. So we can, traditionally you needed a few thousand examples for a neural network to be able to learn something, but we can get away with as little as 5 or 10. So it also allows us to
lines. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it also allows us to operate a lot more like a traditional software company, where it's like, hey, this doesn't work. Can you fix it, please? Here's an example to reproduce it, and we can do things off that. Whereas it used to be like, okay, great, I need 2,000 of those.
And did you have to do like internal benchmarks to figure out like how many samples effect led to what level of accuracy?
That's correct. Yeah.
And the current model that you have, if you had to like ballpark how many lines of examples you needed to get to that level of robustness, like what's the magnitude? Are we talking like tens of thousands, hundreds, millions?
I mean, we train on millions of words, so like an entire bookshelf full of books type size, which again is vastly orders of magnitude bigger than any like research data set or something you would find online. Also the quality of it, making sure that annotations are very good, because all the open source and research data sets that have so much labeling error in them typically that also prevents you from building a good product. Like, one of the basics, machine learning, garbage in, garbage out, your model is only as good as the data you train it on. Well, if the labeling error is 10%, then, if the labels are only ever 90% accurate, well, your model is only ever going to be 90% accurate. So it's a lot of that, and also just making sure that the data is diverse enough. So a lot of the techniques we use are actually, funnily enough, there's a lot of parallels, I would say, between the way we work and how Tesla does things. So if you look at them, they're a very data-focused company. I mean, sure, they have a lot of neural network experts as well, but also their approaches to data capturing and stuff like that is, I would say, there's definitely some parallels of how we do things.
So when you were first working on the data, were you the one that labeled the data yourself?
That was actually Patricia's job. We since have like a data team with a data manager and stuff like that to do that for us. But I mean, that's the other thing, is that on the face of it, deciding if something is sensitive or not sounds easy, but all the edge cases and really making sure that whatever system you build is compliant with legislation, you really kind of need an expert to, at the very minimum, like set up the system and decide what is what. Because, in the real world, there's just so many edge cases which you need to decide. Like, for example, is student loan, is that I have a student loan, is that I personally identify? No, it's not. But if I have a loan at the local town bank for 25 years, that's a lot more like identifying as someone, for example. So like, how do you decide in that? Or like, I'm a worker. Everyone works, right? So that's not sensitive. Probably not. Some people would say yes, but like I am a chiropractor, or if I'm an astronaut, for example, well, there's only 100 astronauts or so. So that narrows things down a lot more, right?
That's really interesting.
And it's a question of like, where do you draw the line on what is sensitive, right? And also like age, like I'm in my 20s or I'm in my 30s. Is that sensitive? Or I am 3,500 or something days old and 11 minutes or something, right? That would be pretty specific, right? So also, how do you draw the line, right? Because also a lot of the legislation out there is also very vague. So you frequently need to rely on like expert opinions on like legal rulings and stuff like that. And, you need to know all this stuff in order to build a compliance system.
So you have a data team that works with a legal expert. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
And so the data team
actually have Anne Kavukian, who's the inventor of privacy by design, which is one of the components of GDPR. She's actually an advisor to the company. That, and Patricia's also doing, or was doing, I should say, her PhD in privacy preserving machine learning. So she's also a very big expert in the field, and knows a lot about the regulations and stuff. I mean, I really don't know much at all. My expertise is really more on the machine learning and software development side, and I guess also some of the business functions. But yeah, like we have a lot of that expertise in house. But Patricia also has a lot of connections with the law firms and stuff like that. So between those two things.
So for the data team, are these the people that label data from a variety of different sources, call it like books, blogs, wiki articles, whatever, just anywhere you can see different structures of data in diverse types? And how big was that team, and how long did it take for them to like label a sufficient set?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's a neural network, so there's never enough, or we're never done. Like, it's always a thing that more data is more performance.
More data is more performance, yeah.
Returns. And that's at least from my perspective and my experience, it's always the easiest way to improve a machine learning system is just more data of higher quality.
Do you happen to know how many people there were, or how long they took to label that data?
Pardon me, yeah. So we have about 15 people in the data team now, and it's growing quite rapidly. And yeah, I think we've expended at least 20 or 30 person years so far in the labeling effort.
Wow.
And that's a number that is increasing very rapidly.
I can definitely see that being part of that competitive advantage that gives you the difference in quality.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also a matter of like collecting the data, right? Because like blog posts, stuff like that, that's all publicly available. So it typically doesn't have any or much PI. So, for example, like there's no open source data sets with like credit card numbers or social security numbers.
That makes sense.
So it's also a question of like, how do you get hold of that data, right? A lot of that we've had to synthesize some examples, but then we've also been very lucky to get some manually redacted examples from some of our customers in order to build our systems on.
I see. Something I really appreciate about a lot of AI companies is like the models themselves just really need really good inputs and really good labeling. But in terms of like the engineer to impact ratio, it's really incredible. You mentioned like 4 engineers now, and I'm pretty sure in the early days it's probably just like you and maybe one other person. It's incredible how far you can go with just like a super small team and a lot of like compute power.
Yeah, it's really incredible, but I think it's also a testament to the tools that are available today as well, because there's no way you would have been able to do this 5 years ago.
That makes sense.
Even if you had all the same algorithms, just the tooling and how much time that took. Also, like TensorFlow V1, that was the first, I would say, real like production-ready tool. I started off with things like Cafe and Theano, which were out of research labs, and Caldi, and they really just were not up to scratch in terms of not to detract from the work they did. I mean, there were at the time groundbreaking pieces of software, but yeah, now you have all the might of like Google and all the might of Facebook and all the might of Nvidia, like the world's biggest companies, building these like, for quite a few years now, like these ginormous pieces of software. The level that software has come to is amazing. Like, I mean, I used to work for a German company doing ADAS software, and yeah, like it really is incredible that, like, there were, I think a couple of hundred people all up working on the software there, and yeah, you could really do most of that with a team of like maybe 10 or 20 people now, with machine learning, like the latest deep learning approaches.
What is the platform of choice that you like to recommend for people trying to do training? Do you do on device or do you do it in cloud?
We mostly do it locally. I mean, we do some cloud stuff, but we're actually pretty. Yeah, I'm maybe not the biggest fan of the cloud. I think it really has its place. But it can get very expensive very quickly, and I feel it also can add a lot of complexity very quickly. And especially cloud experts are like hen's teeth at the moment. So I hope you've heard that expression before.
I've heard something. I imagine I understand what it means.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Australia, so sometimes I say weird things. But it's just, the cloud can get so complicated, like, okay, so you have your data here in this bucket, the machine's there, and you have to connect the two, and like all the permissioning and starting stuff up. Like, we'll inevitably do that someday, but we do a lot of our training locally on workstations at the moment.
Is there like one centralized workstation, or does every engineer have their own workstation to train?
It's a mix, but we typically have some big machines to do the big models on. Pardon me, and then we also have individual workstations for people to work on.
Is this like consumer grade hardware, or do you just buy like server racks and like connect them together?
At the moment, we're running on consumer grade stuff, but yeah, again, that'll probably change. And that's also
pretty impressive on how far you can go.
Yeah. I mean, our system is also designed to process data, like huge volumes of data, so it also needs to process very quickly. So as a result, there's also kind of a practical limit to how much or how big we can train models. So
do you feel like it's on the roadmap of call it the next 2 quarters to like 10x the magnitude of training data?
10x is a lot. Like, really what it comes down to is it's like just raw word count. I don't feel is really a very good metric. It's more like, how diverse is it? How well labeled is it? And how well do you really understand what's in there? Like, are you sure that everything in there is actually really helping the model, or is this some of it just some random stuff that you've got that isn't reflective of any client use case and won't be? Could that actually be detracting from performance? Like, we have actually found a couple of examples from that. So
I see.
I like to think of it more in terms of like the quality and the diversity, because especially with the transformer networks, they're pre-trained on huge volumes of data. So yeah, you really, I mean, we use a lot of additional techniques on top of this, but you don't need the type of volume that you used to need to train the network. So I feel quality and diversity matter even more now.
In terms of legal compliance, how good is good enough? If you like even if with an expert, these experts aren't necessarily the people making the judgment calls all the time. Though they're probably close to the people who are. How do you know that a certain threshold is what is like enables a company to call themselves legally compliant or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Also a bit of a gray area, and also something where we've noticed in the market that, there's a lot of people with like legacy rule-based systems relying on regexes and stuff like that, and they're selling them as like compliant with all the legislation when they're really not. But the really bad thing is it's actually on the customer if it goes wrong, which it inevitably will if you're using it for things like GDPR compliance. Instead of on them. So it's a really hard topic, and a lot of the legislation, such as the GDPR, is actually quite vague on the subject. But one thing is clear is that it needs to be very, very high. From our perspective, a system like ours is the absolute minimum to achieve like compliance of this legislation and actually just do a good enough job to satisfy, for example, consumer and company expectations. Like if you're missing 5 or 10% of credit card numbers, or if you're 90 or 95% accurate and missing 5 or 10%, I think most people would say that's not good enough. Something as sensitive as that, it really needs to be 100% or as close to as possible to that. Some things like, I'm not an expert, our CEO, Patricia, is much more knowledgeable in this, but some things like the HIPAA standards, it's not on redaction accuracy, but on re-identification risk, which is another metric. And the requirement there is 0.04%. So it's very, very high.
Okay. But there's no specific threshold numerically for GDPR and other compliance?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Although, and again, Patricia would be the best person to answer that question. But one thing is very clear is that it is very, very high.
Where do you feel like current enterprises are falling short? Do they not know about these requirements? Do they not want to comply, or do they do they think they're falsely compliant by using other tools?
I think it's really a mix of all of those. I mean, a lot of people are selling tools out there which really aren't up to scratch, and people think that's okay. A lot of the times, because it's all for internal use, that no one actually knows that these systems are really not performing well. And I think it's also a change of mindset because, the GDPR in 2018, that really changed things. So it's really only been a couple of years where privacy hasn't just been a nice to have or an afterthought, but actually required by law. And even now, there's many companies which really aren't too fazed by it, which is changing very, very rapidly, I think. There's no better way to destroy your reputation and a large part of your business than by having a data breach or people figuring out that you're doing all kinds of things that you shouldn't have been.
So when you're selling a product, are there any examples of like pushback that come to mind? Like what are some reasons that a company wouldn't buy your software if they had the need for GDPR compliance and maybe even like similar things?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a lot of the time there's an internal system already there, and then people are we've got something, it's good enough. And I think also, especially for like startups and stuff like that, like everyone's busy, everyone has a lot of stuff to work on. Yeah, there's let's say a 10, 20, 30% chance your company isn't there next year. And that's really the biggest risk and the thing you should be focusing on. I feel is kind of the mindset. But yeah, typically we have a lot of interest in our products. It's just kind of getting people to put compliance and privacy as a priority. Because every company is busy, everyone has a lot of stuff to do, everyone typically doesn't have enough people and too few resources. And like, yeah, where are you going to prioritize that? Like, yeah, sure, this is a thing, but like of all the things that there are, should you be working on this type mentality? But I mean, that's also, I think, a big advantage of our system is it's just a black box. It integrates with 3 lines of code. It just runs on anything, anywhere. There's no GPUs, no system set up, nothing required. It runs we distribute our system as a Docker container. It just runs anywhere like any other piece of software, which I would say is still pretty unique for a deep learning based system, given that most need specialized hardware like GPUs. So just being able to plug it in, use it with 3 lines of code and like, look, it's a black box. It just works. It's a really simple API. It literally has just one API route. Well, I guess 2 kind of, but like one main one, a couple of options. There's no like knobs or levers to fiddle with or change. Just put it in, it works. You can visually see that it works well. I mean, some people really like, having lots of knobs and buttons and being able to fiddle and play and stuff. But yeah, we've purposely designed this to be as easy as possible. It integrates so that, hey, look, just leave this up to us. we're focused on all this kind of stuff, and you can focus on building your business and making money.
So when you're talking to a prospective customer who's considering your solution, what titles do they usually hold? Like, who's responsible for compliance in most companies for the solutions that you offer?
Yeah, we typically go a lot after CTOs and machine learning people, and also a lot of the compliance folk within a company. So things like CISOs.
In terms of what you've been learning, so in terms of like talking with customers, once they become customers, they start using, like how much feedback has your model gained from working with customers versus you working with external data? Like, what's the percentage that you get to like ballpark it?
Sorry, so like how much of the improvement is due to the feedback we've had from our customers?
Yes.
Very large amount. I would say it's at least 50%. I mean, if it's not just the data, it's at least, hey, we're working with this kind of stuff. Like being able to steer it into that stuff. So we focus very heavily on conversational data, so like speech recognition systems. We have a number of customers in this area, and like, you know, just being our system, you know, just it being able to handle the nuances of the different speech recognition systems is very important. So we do a lot of like specific optimizations there, which, you know, like at least to our knowledge, there's no other tool in the market with that kind of focus for this area.
If there are entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs watching this episode that want to get into the space of cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, what are some general tips you give them based on what you've experienced? They don't necessarily have to be building a competitor to you, but like in general, like what are some of the things you learned that you only could have learned by being in the space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm definitely not an expert. I was new to this field.
Okay, we're all here to share what we learned.
I mean, my background and my experience is really in machine learning deployment and optimization and things like that. But yeah, I guess just in terms of my experience and what I've learned is being able to make a compelling use case to company, because just saying, hey, compliance, that's typically not a very hot topic. Whatever you do, make sure it's very practical and easy to use. You know, the whole value is being able to give someone who's not an expert a tool that they can do something that usually would have required an expert. Like building something that does what an expert would do, but requires an expert to operate it is, you know, that's not really solving the problem too much. And I think really choosing a specific problem, really specific focus, very like I know that's what everyone says about startups, like really choose a specific problem and stuff, but yeah, that was really the case for us. Like, don't try to build an all-purpose toolkit or something like that. Just really focus in on one specific thing and do it well. And
I think that's one of you just put it into better words than myself, but I feel like when I was looking at your website, I was like, dang, they do one. It's very clear what you do. And like I really like that slider thingy where you can like slide the image to see which information is redacted. I was like, oh dang, that's like makes it extremely clear to any outsider who's even non-technical what the product does. And I think that simplifies it a lot for people who are just considering solutions.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and just boiling it down for more layman's terms, I mean, cybersecurity especially, I think, really likes its acronyms. You know, and we were just at a big startup event from one of our investors, and we were surrounded by cybersecurity companies. And I have no experience whatsoever in that space. And just all the acronyms that were being thrown around was really, I had no idea. And it actually turned out that that was one of the main things, one of the main bits of feedback from investors as well, is that like, look, there's just too many acronyms. Like, I mean, I think if you have like a really niche product and you know, like that niche customer, they'll understand. But yeah, being able to really relate it and make sure it's really solving like a real problem, a real use case is also a big one. And I think it's also like really focus on like, I think the more boring it sounds, the better the opportunity it is. Like if you can get rid of, if you can get rid of the most boring job of someone, that's far better than, hey, I'm going to take away the thing you like doing most in your day. So for this reason, for example, I don't think, auto machine learning systems or something like that are really such a good bet, because most data scientists spend their entire day just fiddling with data to have that couple of glory moments with the algorithms. And if you say, okay, well, you just got to get all the data fiddling and the glory algorithm work is now going to be done by this automated package thing, no one's going to sign up to use that. Whereas if you say, hey, I'll do all the data cleaning stuff for you, and you get to do all the fun model fiddly stuff, which, everyone, at least from my experience, what everyone wants to be doing, that's a far easier sell. So making sure you're getting rid of the mundane work. I feel that's also a good way to be able to sell things. Because everyone needs to justify to their boss and stuff like that why they want something. But at the end of the day, you can always make those things look the way you want. And even now in today's, competitive labor market where, it's so tough to find good people. If you can make your employee a bit happier and get rid of one of the shit jobs that they have to do, if it costs a bit of money, well, what is that if you make that person happier and make them more productive and require less of their time at the same time?
Well, I really appreciate your insights this past hour. I love going deep on technical domains, and I love having technical founders on the show. But I'd love to give you the stage now. For the people who want to follow you and your company's journey along, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and have a chat. It's the hours really flown by. You can follow us on Twitter, on our website. Probably our website is the best place to keep track of what we do. And if anyone has any questions on privacy compliance, especially related to machine learning and stuff like that, more than happy to have a chat and just give some pointers. There's a lot of different technologies and stuff out there, and could definitely give some good advice there. If anyone just wants to get in touch, have a chat, more than happy to reach out on LinkedIn or something.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, Peter.